Okay, welcome everyone to this next week. This is going to be on memory, and the first PowerPoint is going to cover the process of memory, how you actually remember things, and then the second part is going to talk about different types of memory. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So here we have the chapter on memory. Ignore the chapter 6. This is just when I used a book version, which I do not use anymore just because it's easier with online learning to have something online. Okay, so there are different types of models to define what memory is and how we remember things. So this first type is called information processing model. And it has to do with categorizing something called sensory memory, so such as iconic memory and echoic memory. So iconic memory is more so has to do with sight, and echoic memory, it has to do with sound. So you have these senses, and the memories come in, or the stimuli comes in through the senses, and as you see down here, a sensory input. So maybe it's a rock band you're listening to and you're hearing and listening, it turns into a sensory memory. And if you're paying attention to this sensory experience for more than a couple seconds, then it goes into short-term memory. But first, before it does that, it has to begin encoding. Okay, so going back here, we have the rock band playing a lot of music. They have maybe crazy outfits on. After a couple seconds of watching them, goes into your sensory memory and then begins the process of encoding. So it encodes, goes into the short-term memory, and this also is a concept of working memory, meaning that you're constantly kind of memorizing and rehearsing it, and this is through maintenance rehearsal. So you are constantly maybe reviewing the song that they just sung, or whatever it may be, and you may not be very aware that this is happening. So then you continue with encoding, and it goes into long-term memory storage if you decide that you want to keep this memory for a while. And then if you want to maybe talk about this memory to your friends and family later that week, then you retrieve that memory and you talk about maybe a specific incident that you remember clearly. Maybe that funny incident where the artist ended up messing up part of the song and kind of created a whole new song. And so you remember it because you kept bringing it up into your head because you thought it was funny. So that kind of maintenance rehearsal happened, it encoded it, and now you are retrieving it to talk to your family about it. Now, we also have this little thing that goes from external events, so senses, to long-term memory storage. And this happens when we come across something that we are very familiar with or already familiar with, and it pulls from our long-term memory storage. So, for example, maybe you are walking along the road and you capture this smell, and it's the same smell that you associate with your family's house back home. So it pulls maybe this Christmas time memory or Valentine's Day time memory that you associate with this certain time frame in your life. And you pull from it, and you're able to kind of get like this deja vu feeling a little bit. So this also happens when people enter their grandparents' house after being away for a while. Maybe they pull that long-term memory of them being kids, and then it goes into it kind of skips all of this, and it's something that you experience directly from this process and pulls. Okay. So short-term memory or working memory is this process of maintenance rehearsal, and it usually has to stay in your mind and be repeated for around 5 to 7 seconds in order for it to kind of get into your working or short-term memory. So sensory memory, it's like 1 second, 2 seconds, and then it's encoded into working or short-term memory. And then from there, if it's deemed to be important enough, it goes into that long-term memory storage. Okay, here we have two different types of memory processing. The first is automatic. These have to do with habits that you form, reflexes, things like that. Maybe you're pulling from an implicit memory or something that you don't have conscious recall about, and then process it. So an example would be your mom telling you that you have to go to the dentist, and you all of a sudden don't want to go to the dentist. You have this adverse reaction to it. And in reality, it's pulling from this bad time when you were 5 and you got one of your teeth pulled, and you're 15 now, but you don't really remember it, but it pulls from your memory as you to think about. The same could be said for something more positive like motor and cognitive skills such as riding a bike. So your friends say, oh, let's go on a bike ride, and you're about 15 and you haven't ridden a bike since you were 10, but you're still able to jump on and give it a go and able to do that process. So something that is more effortful, or things that kind of require your conscious processing, are things that are done in this area, such as personally experienced events such as family holidays and facts and general knowledge. So like personal thoughts, and also general knowledge. And it goes through something called explicit memories, declarative with conscious recall, while the other one was implicit memories, non-declarative. And the effortful memories are processed in the hippocampus and frontal lobes, because if you remember, the frontal lobes deal with kind of the cognitive processes, higher orders of thinking, and it's branched into these two things. While the automatic is processed in the cerebellum, and it is kind of broken down into 3 different areas: space, time, frequency. Like where you ate dinner yesterday, you probably don't remember that, but it's something that is just kind of an automatic thing that if you try, you can pull it out of thin air. Motor and cognitive skills, and then classical conditioning. Okay, so we're going to talk about this in more detail in the next section, but within the other PowerPoint, just because I think it does it a little bit better of a job. But we're going to be talking about long-term memory, the differences between procedural memory and implicit memory, and automatic processing, and then also declarative memory, which has to do with semantic memory, and which is general knowledge type of memory, and episodic memory, which has to do with personal memories. So your personal memory of Christmas or a birthday or a traumatic event, whatever it may be. So we're also going to review kind of the types of memory. So the other 2 processes other 2 models that are often associated with memory is levels of processing model and the parallel processing model. But the main one that I want you to think about is the information processing model that I showed above. So these 2 other processing models are not as popular as the main model that I showed you. So sometimes we can have problems with memory. For example, when information comes in through our sensory senses, and it hits the sensory information, the senses, maybe register this amazing detail, but slowly as it goes into short-term memory and long-term storage and then retrieval, some of these bits and pieces are forgotten. And that's because when it hits working or short-term memory, only part of that experience is taken and encoded, just because we can only have a certain number of things kind of rattling around in our head. We can't memorize the entire scene as much as we want to. And then it goes into the long-term storage, and depending on the different times that we remember something, we may remember something fondly or irritatingly, or maybe you remember Christmas as a child fondly, but when you were younger, you remembered more upsetting things that happened during Christmas time that you have since forgotten. So it depends upon how often you retrieve this material, and also how aware you are of your feelings during that time, and it can kind of leave a mark on that memory. So even if we try to say that our memories hold the same merit as our years go by, it actually doesn't, because it changes depending upon how we remember the situation. So there are some problems with memory. Maybe when we're processing, we are not doing it correctly, or inaccurate recall. We just recall something inaccurately. It could be because of not encoding it correctly. Maybe you didn't have all the information of something, and so you remember this event poorly, or maybe you remember the event and you remember that your dad was fighting with your mom or something like that. And so it was encoded in that way, maybe in a childlike way. While in reality, your mom like bullied your dad or something like that. And it kind of just warped and changed as you as a child was able to think about it. So we also have this new development of repressed memories, and this has to do with kind of more a defense mechanism. Repressed memories are something I don't really talk about just because I don't know a lot about it, but it's something that has been brought up in courts and things like that. We technically can't use them as an accurate way to say that rape happened or anything like that after a certain number of years, or if it happened during childhood, just because it's hard to pull from that. And it just depends upon the situation. And also, use it or lose it. So we really get this when we're thinking about language. So say we are 5 years old and we know French, English, and Spanish, and we can use it intermittently, and we're great at it. And then we go into like middle school and high school, and we only use French and English, and we lose Spanish. And then we go into adulthood and we use French a little bit, but mostly English, and we've completely lost Spanish. So just that development, you have to keep reviewing it over and over again in order to keep it fresh in your mind. So a way that we can improve kind of your memory, we can do so, and it'll actually help improve your grades. So one of the ways we do this is by learning the material in more than one way. So, for example, I would encourage you all to read the content of the week first, take some notes, then review this, the PowerPoint, take some more notes, and then start kind of making like a mind map of everything, of just kind of outlining out the different concepts. And then from there, try quizzing yourself to think of to help with retrieving. You can think of examples and connections. So trying to form examples for all the different terminologies that we use, for all the different concepts. I try to do that as best I can. Mine aren't always very good, but it just forming that connection and making it kind of a real thing that happens to you. Minimize interference with related material, fun activities. So you don't want to watch Law and Order while you are studying. You really want to dedicate a quiet time in order to do that. Now you can listen to some music. It's probably better to listen to music that doesn't have words because that'll go into your memorization process. So studying right before sleep is often found to be really helpful. You want to have multiple study sessions at first. They want to be pretty close together and then spaced further and further apart after first learning that material. And you want to try different ways of retrieving information, whether it be you asking the questions or you providing the answers and then coming up with questions, whatever it may be, but just different ways of doing it. And then testing yourself. All right, so now we're going to go on to the next PowerPoint. All right, I'm going to share it now. Okay, so yet again, this is kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit different way of looking at it. And, you know, if you didn't quite capture all the information in that other PowerPoint, this one should kind of fill in those pieces. So an overview of this is going to be types of memory, stages of memory, and kind of putting it all together. So the first one is working memory, and this is this idea of being able to hold information in mind for a brief time, kind of work with it. Okay, and you can has to do with chunking, so you can hold something in your mind and hold a max 5 to 7 plus or minus of one thing in your mind, and you chunk that information together. Semantic memory is kind of your storehouse of more or less permanent knowledge. So history of the United States, math lessons, science lessons. So things that are kind of, I don't want to say the same, but are kind of encoded the same across the board for everyone, whether or not that actually happens. But the information is the same. Whether or not you encode it is, or how you encode it is up to you, but the information itself is the same. Well, episodic memory is personal to you and your point of view. So someone, say for example in this picture, the mother sitting on the couch is going to have a different interpretation of this picture being taken in this time frame than one of the girls laying on the ground. So just the different ways of remembering what happens in your life. And the people that make up your life, they may remember things differently from you. So then we have this idea of collective memory, and we touched on this when we were talking about culture, but the kind of memory that people in a group share, so it could be family, community, schoolmates, citizens of a state or country. So the US has kind of this collective memory of what happened since 1776 and before and after. And we also have kind of this cultural memory when we are growing up in a certain family and that has a strong cultural background. And this kind of collective memory is passed forward through the generations. Okay, so encoding, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but this is the initial process or experience of perceiving and learning events. It's when we actually take in the information and we process it in a way that can kind of stick in our brain. Recoding is taking information from one form and converting in a way that makes sense to us. So please excuse my dear Aunt Sally is a way that we remember the order of math, of how to do different basic math, and the order of operations. So being able to kind of recode things to make it fit your own what you are going to remember. Okay, now we also have storage. Memory trace is the change in the nervous system that represents our experience. Consolidation, the neural changes that occur over time to create a memory trace of an experience. So within that same storage space, we also attach certain emotional memories to we attach certain emotions to memories. So emotional memories are going to be more vivid and stay in our mind much longer and be able to be retrieved much quicker than memories without strong emotion attached to them. So in the same way, this is a process of learning. So we have this, the reason we have this storage area is so that after we learn something within 5 to 10 minutes, if we actually learned it, then we should be able to retain that information and pull from it for a test or something like that. So this idea of being able to keep memory in your mind for later to pull it out and use. Retrieval is when we actually pull out the memory to use it. And it has to be available and accessible. So information that you are able to retrieve easily and all of that. Okay. So ways that we measure retrieval is, of course, as we know, through different tests. So tests that ask for short answers or essay questions are going to measure retrieval better than ones that work on more recognition. Not to say that one is right or wrong, but it depends upon what you're trying to learn and what is being required of you in that class, or for whatever reason the test that you're taking, whatever it is trying to measure you against. You can use production test or recognition tests. Okay, so that is all I want to cover for today. I may post another video, I'm not sure, but that is it for memory right now. If you have any questions, please let me know and we can review it. Okay.